My name is Margaret, and I'm 52 years old. 3 months ago, my world collapsed when I got the phone call that changed everything. My daughter Sarah was gone, taken in a car accident that happened in seconds but left a lifetime of pain. But this isn't just a story about loss. This is about what happened after, when my 8-year-old grandson Jake looked me in the eyes and said something that would start a battle I never saw coming. I remember that Tuesday morning like it was yesterday. The rain was hitting my kitchen window in steady drops, and I was making my usual cup of coffee when the phone rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. It was Dr. Martinez from St. Mary's Hospital. His voice was gentle but direct. Sarah had been driving to pick up Jake from Lincoln Elementary when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Oak and Main Street. She died instantly, they said, trying to be gentle with words that cut like razor blades through my soul. I dropped the phone and heard it shatter on my kitchen floor as I fell to my knees. The sound echoed through my empty house like a gunshot. My baby girl, my only child, my reason for living, was gone at 28 years old. The coffee mug slipped from my hands and broke into pieces, mixing porcelain shards with my tears. I stayed there on that cold linoleum floor for what felt like hours, screaming until my voice was raw and my throat burned. The next 3 days passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and legal paperwork that I couldn't comprehend. Sarah had been a single mother by choice after her bitter divorce from Jake's father 3 years earlier. She had fought for full custody and won, building a beautiful life for herself and Jake in a small apartment just 10 minutes from my house. She worked as a nurse at the same hospital where she would eventually take her last breath, and Jake was her entire universe. The funeral was held at Mount Olive Baptist Church, where I had taken Sarah since she was Jake's age. The sanctuary was packed with Sarah's colleagues from the hospital, neighbors from her apartment complex, and friends from Jake's school. I wore my black dress, the same one I had worn to my husband Robert's funeral 5 years earlier, and tried to hold myself together for Jake's sake. Jake sat in the front pew between me and Rachel, his stepmother from his father's brief remarriage. Rachel was a 29-year-old real estate agent with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer black dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. She had married Jake's father Marcus 2 years ago, but their relationship had been rocky from the start. Marcus worked in construction and traveled frequently, leaving Rachel to manage a household she never really wanted. During the service, Pastor William spoke about Sarah's dedication to helping others, her fierce love for Jake, and her unwavering faith even through her divorce and single motherhood struggles. I watched Jake from the corner of my eye. He sat perfectly still, his small hands folded in his lap, tears silently streaming down his cheeks. My heart broke watching him try to be brave when his whole world had just crumbled. After the service, as people offered their condolences and shared memories of Sarah, Jake quietly walked up to me and wrapped his small arms around my waist. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes that were so much like his mother's and whispered, "Grandma Maggie, can I come stay with you tonight? I don't want to be anywhere else." His words hit me like lightning. This child, in his deepest grief, was choosing me for comfort. Rachel immediately stepped between us, her perfectly manicured hand firmly on Jake's shoulder. "Jake needs to be home with his family now," she said, not making eye contact with me. "Marcus and I need to figure out our new normal, and Jake needs stability and routine." Her voice was controlled but cold, and I could hear the underlying message. I was not considered family in her eyes, despite being Jake's grandmother and Sarah's mother. I understood the legal reality. When Sarah and Marcus divorced, Rachel had legally adopted Jake during their marriage. Now that Sarah was gone, Rachel was his legal guardian. But the look in Jake's eyes told me this was far from over. There was fear there, mixed with desperation. This wasn't just a grieving child seeking comfort. This was a child who sensed he wasn't truly wanted where he was supposed to belong. 2 days after the funeral, on a Thursday afternoon, Jake appeared at my front door. He had walked 12 blocks from Rachel and Marcus's house in the suburbs to my small home in the old neighborhood where Sarah grew up. His school backpack was on his shoulders, his clothes were wrinkled, and tears were streaming down his face. He had somehow gotten my address and navigated busy streets to find me. "She said Mom didn't really love me," he sobbed as I pulled him into my living room. She said Mom was selfish for not marrying someone who could take better care of me. She said that's why God took Mom away, to teach me a lesson about being grateful. I felt my blood turn to ice. What kind of person says that to a grieving 8-year-old child who just lost his mother? I held Jake on my couch, the same couch where Sarah used to do her homework as a teenager, and let him cry until he had no tears left. Then I called Rachel immediately. Her phone went straight to voicemail 3 times before she finally answered on the 4th call. "Where is Jake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "He should be at home doing his homework," she replied, irritation clear in her voice. When I explained that he was at my house, she exploded. "He's manipulating you, Margaret. Children do this when they're grieving. They say things and act out to get attention. He needs structure and discipline, not you spoiling him and filling his head with nonsense about his mother." But I could see the truth in Jake's eyes. This wasn't manipulation or attention-seeking behavior. This was a child desperately trying to find safety and love in a world that suddenly felt dangerous and uncertain. When Rachel came to pick him up an hour later, Jake hid behind my recliner and begged not to go back. The scene broke my heart into a million pieces. The pattern continued over the following weeks. Jake would find ways to come to my house after school, showing up at my door with his backpack and homework. He started telling me things that made my blood run cold and my hands shake with anger. Rachel would leave him alone for hours while she showed houses to clients or went out with friends. She had thrown away some of Sarah's pictures that Jake kept in his room, saying he needed to move on and stop living in the past. She had also gotten rid of Sarah's jewelry, including the necklace Sarah wore every day that Jake wanted to keep. "Dead people don't need jewelry," Rachel had told him when he asked about it. She made him call her Mom instead of Rachel, even though he wasn't comfortable with it. When he refused, she would send him to his room without dinner, saying he was being disrespectful to his new family. Every story Jake shared broke my heart a little more, but it also strengthened my resolve. This child needed an advocate, someone who would fight for him the way Sarah would have fought. I started documenting everything Jake told me, writing down dates, times, and exact quotes. I took pictures of him when he arrived at my house upset, noting his emotional state and any physical signs of neglect. One evening in late October, about 6 weeks after Sarah's death, Jake was helping me make dinner in my small kitchen. We were preparing Sarah's favorite meal, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans, when he suddenly stopped stirring the potatoes and looked up at me with those serious brown eyes. "Grandma Maggie, I want to live with you forever," he said quietly. "I dream about Mom every night, and in my dreams, she tells me I should be with you because you love me the same way she did. Can we make that happen? Can I really stay here and never have to go back to that house?" His words hit me like lightning striking twice in the same place. Could we make that happen? I was 52 years old, a widow living on my husband's pension and my part-time salary from working at the local library. My house was small, with just 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. Rachel was younger, married to a man with a steady construction job, and they lived in a 4-bedroom house in the better part of town with a big backyard and a 2-car garage. But Jake was choosing me, and that had to count for something. Didn't it? In the eyes of the law, would a child's expressed wishes matter when weighed against material advantages and legal guardianship? I spent the next several sleepless nights researching grandparents' rights on my old computer, reading custody laws and family court procedures until my eyes burned from staring at the screen. The more I read, the more I realized this would be the fight of my life. Grandparents' rights varied by state, and the courts typically favored existing legal guardians unless there was clear evidence of abuse or neglect. Emotional neglect was much harder to prove than physical abuse, and a child's wishes, while considered, weren't always the deciding factor, especially when that child was only 8 years old. But Jake had chosen me, and I would not abandon him. I knew Sarah would never forgive me if I let her son suffer in silence. If you're watching this and you've ever felt like the system was stacked against you, write in the comments. You're not alone in this battle, and sometimes we have to fight for what's right even when the odds seem impossible. The breaking point came on a bitter cold February morning. Jake had spent the weekend with me, one of the few times Rachel had agreed to let him visit, and when Monday morning came, he refused to get dressed for school. He hid behind my couch crying and begging not to go back to Rachel's house. "Please don't make me go back, Grandma. Please let me stay here with you forever." When Rachel arrived to pick him up, she was already irritated about having to make the drive across town. She had been complaining about the inconvenience of my visits, saying they disrupted Jake's routine and made him more difficult to manage at home. When she saw Jake hiding and crying, her patience snapped completely. "This ends now, Margaret," she said, her voice cold as the February wind. "You're turning him against me with your lies and manipulation. You're making this transition harder for all of us with your interference." She grabbed Jake's arm harder than necessary, leaving red marks on his skin that I took note of for my growing documentation file. Jake screamed for me as she dragged him toward the door. "I hate you," he yelled at Rachel. "I want my real family. I want Grandma Maggie." Rachel's face turned red with embarrassment and anger. She looked at me with pure hatred burning in her eyes. "Don't contact us again," she hissed. "If you try to see him or call him or show up at his school, I'll call the police and file harassment charges. He's my son legally, and you have no rights here." She slammed my front door so hard that the glass rattled in its frame. That night, after crying until I had no tears left, I called a lawyer. Attorney Jennifer Collins was a black woman in her 40s who specialized in family law and had a reputation for taking difficult cases. Her office was in downtown, in an old building that had been renovated but still maintained its historic character. When I told her my story, sitting in her small but professional office, she leaned back in her leather chair and sighed deeply. "Margaret, I won't lie to you because you deserve honesty," she said, her voice both compassionate and realistic. "This will be an uphill battle. The courts typically favor younger guardians who can provide more resources, and Rachel is legally Jake's stepmother with full adoption rights. But if Jake truly wants to be with you, and if there's evidence of emotional neglect or psychological harm, we might have a chance." Her words gave me hope mixed with stark fear. A chance wasn't a guarantee, and Jake's happiness and future hung in the balance. Jennifer explained that we would need to file a petition for custody modification, gather evidence of Jake's wishes and any neglect, and be prepared for a potentially lengthy and expensive legal battle. The retainer fee alone was more money than I had in my savings account. "I'll work with you on payments," Jennifer said, seeing the concern on my face. "Cases like this are why I became a lawyer. Every child deserves to be in a home where they're truly wanted and loved." Her compassion gave me the courage to move forward, even though I knew I was about to face the fight of my life. We filed the petition for custody modification on a Monday in early March. By Wednesday, Rachel's attorney had responded with a countermotion that made my hands shake as I read it. She was represented by Thompson and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the city. Her motion painted me as an aging woman with limited financial resources attempting to manipulate a grieving child for selfish emotional reasons. The document claimed that Jake's statements were coached lies, and that I was demonstrably unfit to provide proper care due to my advanced age, limited income, and lack of appropriate housing for a growing child. Every word felt like a personal attack on not just my capabilities, but my worth as a person and a grandmother. But Jennifer reminded me that this was just legal strategy, not truth. "They're trying to intimidate you," she explained. "This is what they do, attack character to avoid discussing the real issues. But we have something they don't have, Jake's genuine voice and your genuine love. That matters more than they want to admit." Her confidence helped steady my nerves, but I knew the real battle was just beginning. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in April. I wore my best dress, the same black one from Sarah's funeral, and tried to calm my nerves with deep breathing exercises Pastor Williams had taught me. The courthouse was an imposing brick building downtown, with marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Jake wasn't there, he was in school, unaware that his future was being decided in this sterile, intimidating environment. Rachel sat across the courtroom with her attorney, her husband Marcus, and what appeared to be her mother for moral support. She looked confident and put together in a navy blue suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my car payment. I felt small and alone at my table with Jennifer, but she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Remember, truth has power. Stay strong." When Rachel took the stand for her testimony, she painted a picture of herself as a loving, devoted stepmother trying to provide stability for a traumatized child. She spoke eloquently about family counseling sessions she had scheduled, about Jake's need for routine and structure, about the importance of keeping him in his current school district where he had friends and familiar teachers. She talked about the advantages of their home, the big backyard where Jake could play safely, the good neighborhood schools, Marcus's stable job that provided health insurance and financial security. She mentioned family vacations they had planned, the college fund they were starting, and their commitment to giving Jake every opportunity for success. Then she turned to address me directly, and her voice took on a tone of fake sympathy that made my skin crawl. "Your Honor, Mrs. Johnson is a kind woman who loved her daughter deeply. I understand that she's grieving and looking for ways to stay connected to Sarah through Jake. But she's 52 years old and living paycheck to paycheck in a small house in a declining neighborhood." She paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the blow that nearly destroyed me. "Jake has never expressed a desire to live with her. That's a complete fabrication she's created to justify attempting to take a child from his legal family. She's filled his head with stories about his mother that only increase his grief, and she's using his vulnerability to manipulate him into thinking he wants something that would ultimately harm his development and future." The word fabrication hung in the air like poison gas. I felt every eye in that courtroom on me, judging, questioning. Was I really just a delusional old woman trying to steal a child from his rightful family? For a moment, doubt crept in like ice water in my veins. But then I remembered Jake's tears, his pleas, his small hand gripping mine like a lifeline. This wasn't manipulation or fabrication. This was love, pure and desperate and real. When it was my turn to testify, I stood on shaking legs and walked to the witness stand. The courtroom felt enormous, and my voice sounded small when I began to speak. But as I told Jake's story, our story, my voice grew stronger. I spoke from the heart about every visit, every tearful conversation, every time Jake had begged not to go back to Rachel's house. I told the judge about the things Rachel had said about Sarah, about the pictures and jewelry she had thrown away, about leaving Jake alone for hours. I talked about Sarah and the kind of mother she was, about the values she would want Jake to grow up with, about the close relationship we had maintained throughout his life. I admitted my limitations honestly, my age, my modest income, my small house, but I also spoke about my love, my commitment, and my willingness to sacrifice everything for this child who had already lost so much. "Your Honor," I said, looking directly at the judge, "I'm not trying to steal Jake from anyone. I'm trying to save him. He chose me, not because I have the most money or the biggest house, but because he knows where he'll find the love his mother would want him to have. Sarah raised him to know the difference between a house and a home, and he's telling us clearly where he feels at home." The judge listened carefully throughout both testimonies, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. He was an older black man named Judge Harrison with kind but sharp eyes, and I desperately hoped he would understand what I was fighting for. But when court adjourned for the day, I had no idea which way he was leaning. Jennifer tried to reassure me as we walked to her car, but I could see the concern in her eyes too. "We've presented our case as well as we could today, Margaret," she said. "But now comes the hard part, the investigation phase. Social services will interview Jake, visit both homes, and make their recommendation to the court. That process can take several weeks, and their report will carry significant weight in the judge's decision." The waiting period felt like torture stretched across endless days. A social worker named Mrs. Patterson came to my house on a Tuesday afternoon, asking pointed questions about my finances, my health, my daily routine, and my support system. She was professional but thorough, examining every room of my small house and making notes on her clipboard that I couldn't read. I worried that every honest answer about my limitations was another mark against me. Yes, I lived on a fixed income. Yes, my house only had 2 bedrooms. Yes, I was 52 and didn't have the energy I had when Sarah was young. But I also told her about my love for Jake, my experience raising Sarah as a single mother after Robert's death, and my commitment to providing him with stability and emotional security. Mrs. Patterson also interviewed my neighbors, my co-workers at the library, and Pastor Williams at my church. She spoke with Jake's teachers at school, asking about his behavior, his academic performance, and any changes they had noticed since his mother's death. Meanwhile, Jake's court-ordered visits to my house stopped completely. Rachel had convinced the judge to suspend them during the investigation, and I hadn't seen my grandson in over 3 weeks. But then something happened that changed the entire trajectory of our case. Jake's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called Jennifer's office directly. Jake had been acting out at school, crying in class, refusing to participate in group activities, getting into fights with other children. When she kept him after school to talk about his behavior, he broke down completely and told her everything. He told her about Rachel's threats to move them to another state if the custody battle continued. He revealed that Rachel had made him promise never to mention wanting to live with me again, saying that if he did, I would get in trouble with the police and might go to jail. He described being left alone in the house for hours while Rachel showed properties, sometimes until after dark, with only cereal or crackers to eat for dinner. Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't the only person who came forward once word spread about the custody case. My next-door neighbor, Mrs. Williams, reported that she had seen Jake walking to my house alone on multiple occasions, sometimes in the rain without a proper coat. The school counselor, Mr. Davis, documented several conversations where Jake had expressed fear and anxiety about going home, asking if he could stay at school longer. Even more surprising, Rachel's own sister called Jennifer's office from out of state. She said she had been worried about Jake's well-being since Sarah's funeral and that Rachel had always resented Sarah's close relationship with me. She revealed that Rachel had complained frequently about being stuck with Jake, and had made comments about wishing Marcus had never adopted him. The evidence was building in our favor, but I knew the most crucial moment would come when Jake himself had to speak to Judge Harrison. The court ordered a private interview, just Jake and the judge in his chambers, with no lawyers or family members present. This conversation would likely determine our future together, and I was terrified about putting such enormous pressure on an 8-year-old child. The day of Jake's interview, I sat in the courthouse hallway for what felt like an eternity. Jennifer paced back and forth, checking her watch every few minutes. Rachel sat on the opposite side of the hall with her attorney, occasionally glaring in my direction. We all knew that whatever Jake said in that room would likely decide his fate. After an hour and 15 minutes, the chamber doors finally opened. Jake emerged first, his eyes red from crying but his expression determined and resolute. Judge Harrison followed, his face carefully neutral and unreadable. Jake walked directly to me and whispered, "I told him the truth, Grandma. I told him everything, just like Mom would have wanted me to do." I hugged him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his hair that reminded me so much of Sarah. Over his shoulder, I could see Rachel's face had gone pale. Her attorney was whispering urgently in her ear, but she kept shaking her head. Something in Jake's testimony had clearly not gone the way they expected. Judge Harrison announced that he would review all the evidence and testimony before making his final decision. He scheduled the final hearing for the following Friday, exactly 2 months after we had first filed our petition. I had 1 week to either prepare for the greatest victory of my life or the most devastating defeat I could imagine. That week passed in a blur of sleepless nights and anxious days. I couldn't eat, couldn't concentrate on anything, couldn't stop imagining every possible outcome. I prayed more than I had since Robert's death, asking God to guide Judge Harrison's decision and to protect Jake from any more trauma. My friends from church organized prayer circles, and my co-workers at the library offered constant encouragement and support. Rachel's attorney had requested one final opportunity to present character witnesses, and I feared what they might say. But Jennifer reminded me repeatedly that we had something more powerful than any character witness, Jake's own voice speaking his truth, supported by evidence from teachers, neighbors, and even Rachel's own family members. Friday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather for late May, as if the universe was trying to give me hope. I wore my best dress, not the black funeral dress this time, but a navy blue one that Sarah had helped me pick out for a church event years earlier. The courtroom was fuller than before, with social workers, character witnesses, and even some of my friends from the library who had come to support me. I felt their love surrounding me like a protective shield as I took my seat next to Jennifer. Jake was there this time, sitting in the front row next to a court advocate, since the judge wanted him present for the final decision. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and he gave me a small smile that filled my heart with courage. Judge Harrison entered at exactly 10 a.m., and the room fell completely silent. He looked tired, as if this decision had weighed heavily on him for days. He shuffled through papers on his desk, glanced at Jake, then at Rachel, then at me. When he began to speak, his voice was measured and careful. "This case has required me to consider what is truly in the best interest of this child," he began. "I've heard extensive testimony from both parties, reviewed comprehensive social services reports, consulted with school officials and mental health professionals, and most importantly, I've had a lengthy conversation with Jake himself about his wishes and feelings." My heart was beating so loud I was sure everyone in the courtroom could hear it. I gripped Jennifer's hand under the table, trying to prepare myself for either outcome. While Mrs. Rachel Williams can provide certain material advantages and maintains her legal status as Jake's adoptive mother, the evidence presented to this court raises serious concerns about the emotional environment in her home. Multiple witnesses have testified to instances of emotional neglect, inappropriate comments about the deceased mother, and clear signs of distress in the child. I held my breath, afraid to hope but unable to stop the flutter of possibility in my chest. Furthermore, Jake has consistently and clearly expressed his desire to live with his maternal grandmother. This is not a casual preference or a temporary reaction to grief. This is a sustained, well-articulated choice made by a child who, despite his young age, demonstrates remarkable clarity about his own emotional needs and well-being. Judge Harrison paused, looking directly at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. While Mrs. Johnson's age and financial limitations are factors this court must consider, they are not disqualifying factors when weighed against her demonstrated love for this child, her stable home environment, and Jake's clear preference to be in her care. The evidence shows that Jake thrives emotionally in his grandmother's presence and struggles significantly in his current placement. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, Jennifer's breathing, even the ticking of the wall clock. Therefore, after careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, I hereby award primary physical custody of Jake Williams to his maternal grandmother, Mrs. Margaret Johnson, effective immediately. Mrs. Rachel Williams will retain supervised visitation rights pending successful completion of family counseling and parenting classes. The words hit me like a tsunami of relief and joy. The courtroom erupted in whispers and movement, but all I could see was Jake. He jumped up from his seat and ran to me, tears streaming down his face. "We did it, Grandma. We really did it. I get to come home with you." I held him tight against my chest, this brave little boy who had fought alongside me for the family we both desperately needed. Rachel's face was a mask of shock and fury. She stood up abruptly, knocking over her water glass, while her attorney whispered urgently in her ear. But she shook him off and called out to Judge Harrison, "This is a mistake, Your Honor. You'll regret this decision when that child realizes what he's given up." Her words couldn't touch the overwhelming joy and relief flooding through every cell of my body. Jake was finally coming home where he belonged. The transition wasn't easy, despite our victory. Jake had nightmares for weeks, processing not just his mother's death but the trauma of feeling unwanted and unloved in Rachel's home. We started therapy together with Dr. Sarah Chin, a child psychologist who specialized in grief and family transitions. She helped us both understand that healing would take time and that building our new family structure would require patience and communication. I had to make significant adjustments to accommodate an 8-year-old boy in my quiet, settled life. I child-proofed cabinets that hadn't seen a child in decades, learned about Common Core math homework that looked nothing like the arithmetic I remembered, and figured out how to stretch my modest budget to cover growing boy expenses like new shoes every few months and school supplies and sports equipment. My small house suddenly felt alive with sounds I had almost forgotten: Saturday morning cartoons, friends calling on the phone, the constant hum of video games, and the beautiful chaos of a child simply existing in space. Some days were harder than others. Jake would have moments of intense grief for his mother, and I would find him crying in Sarah's old bedroom, which I had converted into his room but filled with pictures of her. But every challenge was worth it for the precious moments that reminded me why we had fought so hard. Jake helping me cook Sarah's favorite recipes while telling me detailed stories about his day at school, including every conversation he had with friends and teachers. Reading bedtime stories together on my old couch, his head growing heavy against my shoulder as his breathing slowed into sleep. Watching him laugh at silly cartoons, a sound I thought I might never hear again after Sarah's death. These weren't just precious moments, they were proof that we had made the right choice, that love really could conquer legal obstacles and societal expectations about age and family structure. 6 months after our court victory, Jake is not just surviving but truly thriving. His grades improved from C's and D's to A's and B's. He made new friends in our neighborhood and joined the local Little League team, where he discovered a talent for pitching that reminds me of his grandfather Robert. Most importantly, he's smiling and laughing again, sounds that fill my house with life and hope. Rachel exercises her supervised visitation rights sporadically, sometimes monthly, sometimes not at all for several months. The relationship between her and Jake remains strained and formal, but Jake has learned to navigate those visits with the confidence that comes from having a secure, loving home base. He no longer fears that he'll be forced to stay somewhere he doesn't want to be. People in our community sometimes look at us with curiosity, the 52-year-old black grandmother raising her grandson in a world that often questions whether older people can handle active, energetic children. Some make comments about my age, suggesting that Jake might be too much for me or that he'd be better off with younger guardians. But Jake and I know something they don't understand. Love doesn't have an expiration date or an age limit. Families come in all shapes, sizes, ages, and configurations. Sometimes the most beautiful, strongest families are born from the ashes of the deepest loss and forged in the fire of fighting for what's right. Jake chose me not because I was the youngest option or the wealthiest option, but because he recognized where he would find unconditional, unwavering love. As I sit here today, watching Jake play baseball in the backyard that used to be too quiet and too empty, I think about Sarah constantly. I know in my heart that she would be proud of the fight we fought and the family we've built from the rubble of tragedy. I talk to her picture every morning, telling her about Jake's achievements, his funny sayings, his growing confidence and happiness. Jake talks to her too, especially at night before bed. He tells her about his day, asks her questions, and sometimes just says, "I miss you, Mom, but I'm okay now." Those conversations break my heart and heal it simultaneously, reminding me that grief and joy can coexist in the same space, in the same heart. To everyone watching who might be facing their own impossible battle, whether it's fighting for custody of a grandchild, standing up to injustice in the legal system, advocating for a child's emotional needs, or just trying to do right by someone you love against overwhelming odds, remember this story. Your voice matters more than you know. The truth has power, even when it's spoken by someone society might overlook. And sometimes the most important victories come when you're brave enough to fight for what's right, even when everyone tells you the odds are impossible. Jake and I are living proof that families aren't just born through biology or created through legal documents. Real families are chosen, fought for, and built with love one day at a time, one decision at a time, one brave moment at a time. We're proof that age is just a number when it comes to love, that financial resources can't replace emotional security, and that sometimes the most unlikely guardians make the most devoted parents. If you've ever had to fight for your family, if you've ever stood up against a system that seemed designed to work against you, if you've ever chosen love over convenience or comfort, drop a comment below. Your story matters too, and you're stronger and braver than you know. The world needs more people willing to fight for children who need advocates, and your courage might inspire someone else to take that terrifying but necessary first step. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about courage, resilience, family, and the power of never giving up on the people we love. Because everyone deserves to know that no matter what challenges you face, no matter how impossible the odds seem, love always finds a way to win in the end.